Hi everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar on the key legal areas of the future for Latin America. Today we have a great panel assembly about some hot topics that we have been seeing across the region and that are of importance to young lawyers in the future. This event is hosted by the IBA's Young Council, and we thank the IBA for its assistance. So I'll just start with the speakers who are joining us today. We have Fernando Mirandes del Nero Gomez, who is a partner at Piñeiro Neto Abogados. Having joined the firm in 2002, he practices in the corporate law group with primary focus on financial institutions coverage. Fernando has advised financial institutions, insurers, payments and fintech companies, asset managers, financial sponsors, and other corporates in a wide array of mandates ranging from M&A, structured finance, capital technology industries. Fernando has also worked as an investment banker at Deutsche Bank's Financial Institutions Group in New York. We also have Alejandra Cicero. She's currently the Vice President Legal at Emergent Forest Finance Accelerator, a nonprofit organization, which is an intermediary engaging between tropical forest countries and the private sector to mobilize finance to support emissions reductions in deforestation. Alejandra joined Emergent last October, and she mainly works with the transactions team in the context of negotiations with buyers and sellers of emissions reductions that derive from the RED plus jurisdictional activities. Prior to joining Emergent, Alejandra was a program officer at the International Senior Lawyers Project. And before that, she was an international visiting associate at Latham & Watkins. And previously she worked at Mijares in Mexico. Alejandra has an LLM from Columbia Law School and a licenciatura in Derecho at the Universidad Iberoamericana. And finally, we have Federico Piano, a lawyer. He's a partner at Guyer y Regules. He has obtained his law degree from Universidad Montevideo. He has completed a master course in corporate law at the Universidad Montevideo and a foreign exchange student program at the University of Minnesota Law School 2006. He's a partner in the corporate and banking department since the creation of the cannabis regulation in Uruguay. Federico has also participated in several projects assisting investors and project developers in financing cannabis companies, obtaining regulatory licenses, and advising day-to-day operations. Federico has also participated in drafting cannabis-related regulations that have been implemented by the Uruguayan government. So we have a great group today. And maybe we'll start with Fernando just to discuss the fintech sector in Brazil. I know your firm and you personally have been involved. So maybe we can start discussing of what you feel has made Brazil such an important center for fintechs and in Latin America and a success story for these type of initiatives. Fernando.
Hey, Diego, thank you very much. And it's a pleasure to be here. Federico, Alejandra, thank you for the IBA for putting this together. It's a pleasure to talk to all of you. I see we have people from all over Latin America and the Americas. So it's going to be great to talk a little bit about Brazil and how Brazil became this fintech hub in Latam. I think there are a few factors that play a role in this success of Brazil, the success story of Brazil fintech. When this became a thing back in 2012, 13, 14, we had 20, 30, 40, 50 startups, and last time they cared to do the math, they had more than 1,000, so they just quit doing this bunch of logos that just didn't make any sense anymore. The first driver that I see for the fintech boom in Brazil was the fact that we had or still have a concentrated financial system in which banks this financial system is very robust. We have banks that are fantastic. They are solid, but most of the assets are concentrated in the hands of a few banks that in different degrees took long to modernize and to give access to the unbanked population, which is also huge in Brazil. That technology came with all the access, and the tech part of fintech just came as a wave to cater a bunch of inefficiencies that were presented in the system. But the central bank tried to tackle with a number of initiatives, but they really saw that the technology was the key driver to make the system more transparent, more accessible, and to really go for products that were to lower interest rates, to lower costs, and to give access to those that didn't have access to the system. So then there comes a second driver, which is the regulation. So payments in Brazil were not regulated until 2013, when the federal law came, and the central bank was a main actor in driving regulatory changes that, for being this on purpose or not, this really was a catalyst to the boom of payment institutions that came to occupy a space that was only reserved to financial institutions. And payment regulations allowed folks to have payment accounts and to do electronic transfers and a number of things that only banks could do, but on a lighter regulatory scheme. And that just became something that really was a wave that came in very fast and created names like Nubank, like Neon, like a bunch of other startups that quickly became relevant startups on the financial sector itself, based on the regulations of payment institutions. Then there is the thing about Brazilians that they're early adopters of new technology. That came on the heels of the new regulations and the online apps for banking. And so Brazilians are very quick to take over WhatsApp and online banking and mobile banking whenever it became easier to just go to do your stuff on banking online and through your web, through your smartphone. This was just basically fuel to all the fire that was growing with the fintechs. But regulation, but unbanked population, but the need for more transparency, more access, more information, together with the adoption that Brazilians have on new technologies, you have basically everybody adopting very quickly these new fintechs. And that came on a country that was not known for, but then it became something that was really I wouldn't say a surprise, but the entrepreneurship soul of the Brazilians. So everybody wanted to be a startup entrepreneur. Everybody wanted to do fintech. And personally, when I saw a bunch of friends from traditional financial system moving to new companies that had 2, 3, 4 years, that was the clue that really things were turning and fintech became a reality and became mainstream. You add to that crypto, you add to that investments, you add XP and its platform. Then in 10 years' time, you had a complete revolution on the financial system that was basically related to the factors that I mentioned here. And we do have a number of unicorns. We became, in Brazil, the destination of most of the VC investments that got this backdrop that once some fintech investors and VC said, well, Brazil is the perfect fertile ground. It's for fintechs because you have low competition, you have a bunch of people that still need the service, you have high costs, high interest rates, you have, the story about the Vivelis, who's from Colombia, came to Brazil to work for a private equity, and he found a new bank just for the fact that he took a month and a half to open a bank account in Brazil when he was an expat coming to work for General Atlantic or when he came 10 years ago. So that was the motivation for him to do that. If you add technology to the system that is really, I would say, old, and which is also due to old regulations, and you bring new regulation, new blood, you bring new people and a market that is waiting for that, that is the perfect storm for you to have this kind of representation of fintechs.
Great. So yeah, you mentioned a bit about the local Brazilian culture, and obviously the size of the market is very relevant. But do you think the regulatory environment has helped somewhat, or has that been more of a restriction?
It has helped, Diego. This is I would say that there are academic pieces and news pieces saying that the champion for all these changes is the central bank, together with the CVM, together with even the insurance authority that was the first one to create a sandbox for innovative measures in the insurance market. But without the help of the regulators, this wouldn't be a reality here. And the regulators, they really took a hard stance in innovating. Around 2016, they created a specific agenda for the development of regulatory initiatives called the BC Plus, which then rebranded to the BC Hash because of everything that was digitalizing. Had a bunch of pillars on things that I said here: transparency, education, access, lower interest rates, more information, so that everybody could access the system. And they took a very aggressive agenda of things that some are straightforward, some are a little bit more controversial, such as the state-owned 24/7 instant transfers called PICs that just came very quickly, taking over bank transfers, which is central bank ran. So there is some controversy here of the role of the central bank. But in terms of regulatory initiatives, they put together a number of different things, and they are always looking to modernize the rules that they even created. So on the line of things that happened when we presented that to clients, we had a timeline of regulatory initiatives from the central bank that a few years ago would fit in one page. Now it doesn't. We gave up because there are so many dots in the line that we need two, 3 pages to say. But first one was payment institutions regulation. Then you had the fintech regulation to be able, so that we have light financial institutions that can lend on a very light regulatory scheme, non-levered institutions. Then you have open banking. Then you have the PICs. Then you have centralized receivables for merchants so they can finance the business. And all other, the cybersecurity, you have now crypto that is coming. You have a new FX rule. So all this came into place in the past 5 or 6 years. Most of that by the central bank hash agenda and this program. And the central bank has been open to public debate. The director of rules and his team are always in webinars discussing what they are doing. And most recently, I think it's a good close to this question, is on Friday last week, just 5 years back, they issued a new set of rules, or 8-9 rules, on trying to close the gap of what the big banks call the symmetry of rules, meaning that for some time the banks have been complaining that the fintechs had lighter regulations and they were able to compete on a different playing field. So the central bank came up with rules that would bring the capital requirements and also the regulatory requirements in general for big conglomerates that are led by payment institutions to levels similar to what big financial conglomerates led by banks face. So that, it's a kind of a push and pull dynamics with the central bank. That was very interesting to see that after this years, and they saw when they got where they wanted, they now just restrain a little bit those that became too big. That was the story at the end of last week. And it's interesting, the central bank is always monitoring. And now this year, apparently crypto is going to be the story of the year in terms of regulatory innovations. They are bringing crypto exchanges on a law and further to central bank regulation. So let's wait and see what happens.
Yeah, that's interesting. And well, because I'm also in banking and finance, so I see that maybe that can also represent a risk as far as some of these companies maybe operate outside right now of the regulatory umbrella, and the regulators try to bring them in and align them in lending and capital requirements and all that. Yeah. So maybe just to close off, maybe your comments on that, and then as also as the Brazilian fintech sector looks outward, what are they looking for in these other jurisdictions, and how can attorneys in these jurisdictions help them to establish a presence?
Yeah, so very good questions. Let me answer first the question about the the attorneys. I'm going to start with your last question. Because of Brazil being a hub for, even there are a bunch of entrepreneurs with many of the fintech unicorns are not even Brazilians. You have David from Colombia, you have Sergio Furio on Creditas, who's Spanish, have Benjamin from Guia Bolso, who's American. You have a number of expats in Brazil because of the opportunities. And one of the things that when they get to a certain size, the VC investors and even public markets, when they IPO, they say you have to expand. And that was true for Nubank. That was true for other companies that were expanding based out of Brazil to other places in Latam. So we need lawyers in all these jurisdictions. So it's always a pleasure to connect with our folks, our fellow lawyers from the firms in the different area, in the different places, Mexico and Central America and Colombia and Argentina, Chile. And it's been more than in any time before, at least in my practice, we've been in touch with partner law firms in the IBA network or others, given the fintech boom. So this is really a great moment for this kind of integration that IBA and the likes provide us, because we need, and sometimes there's conflicts, we need a number of different firms that are able to deal with this Brazilian-based startups that expand on different areas and different jurisdictions at the same time. So this is a really interesting moment. And also when there are foreigners coming to Latin America, when they land in Brazil first and they ask for firms like ours to run Latin America, we've been always the victim of global questionnaires from international firms in different jurisdictions. Now we are the ones doing that with our folks and fellows from Latin America. So this is becoming a thing. On our first question to close out, a regulatory gap, and it's interesting because I'm going to tell you one thing that is perhaps the best example of what's going on here and why they need to regulate, otherwise arbitrage on regulatory, especially not only on regulatory arbitrage, but the fact that some of the players were doing or operating not from Brazil or from any other jurisdiction that like ours. So crypto at a certain point in time, and I think that's true again, around this time, had more, so the crypto exchanges had more investors in Brazil than the capital markets. So there are more people investing in cryptocurrencies through crypto exchange, which is completely unregulated in Brazil, than in the Brazilian stock exchange. So that just shows that you need to do something about regulating these players and making sure people are protected. Of course, there are good players and also there are bad players. There are people that take advantage of the situation, but the regulators need time to grasp what's going on. But this time is each time shorter because things are happening so fast that when they take time to look at what's happening with crypto, for instance, it's already a market for purposes of regulatory framework and for purposes of the prudential regulation that is bigger than the market they have been regulated for 100 years. So this is something that is really, let's say, in the agenda for the regulators, given the fast adoption of Brazilians on new technologies. Brazilians offer crypto futures in Brazil, the access international platforms to do that. So that's certainly something that we will be seeing in the future, in near future.
Great, very, very interesting. So maybe now we turn to another very interesting topic, which is the area of carbon credits. As well, most people know, there are now set targets to reduce carbon. The challenge the world faces in carbon footprint reduction and slowing down global warming is, I think, one of the most imperative challenges of the 21st century. And I think with Alejandra, we can have a bit of a discussion of how that area has been developing on the legal side. So maybe Alejandra, could you mention what Emergent does in the carbon credit space and how they have been contributing in this area?
Yes, thank you, Diego, and thank you everyone for attending this session. So just before I start talking about what Emergent does, just as background, Emergent mainly operates in the voluntary carbon markets and definitely to a lesser extent in the compliance markets. And I can go into more detail later on, but I just want to make that clarification from the outset. So Emergent is a nonprofit that was created like 4 to 5 years ago to address the climate and biodiversity crisis by incentivizing reductions in deforestation. The way we do this and the way we advance our mission is by engaging and facilitating transactions of REDD+ jurisdictional credits that are issued by tropical forest countries and paid for by private sector entities and by sovereign donors. I mean, there are many challenges towards addressing the climate crisis and also towards reaching the 2030 targets. But why focus on the reduction of deforestation in the context of climate and biodiversity crisis? Emergent decided to focus on these because, I mean, tropical forests are one of the most powerful tools to slow and ultimately halt climate change. They store up to like 1/4 of all the above the ground carbon and represent 50% of the world's terrestrial biodiversity. Also, I mean, and just to put things a little bit in context, the tropical forest deforestation and degradation make up to 10% of the net human cost greenhouse gas emissions. Just between 2019 and 2020, deforestation of primary forests increasing 12%. And then also to give like a visual to everyone here in this session, every 15 minutes, the world loses an area of tropical forest that is equal to New York Central Park. This destruction emits 100,000 metric tons of CO2, and this is not easily recoverable. Trying to sequester this amount of carbon in a year would require like planting or creating secondary forests that are 50 times as much. I mean, planting 50 times as much forest as we lost. So really the focus has to be in protecting primary forests. Now, how do we do this? What does Emergent specifically do in the context of carbon markets? Emergent acts as a transactions platform for REDD+ jurisdictional carbon credits. And as I mentioned, we mainly operate in the voluntary carbon markets, which is where entities participate in a voluntary basis. And then to a way lesser amount in the context of compliance markets, for example, in CORSIA, which is very relevant to airlines. And before I move on, I'm just conscious that not everyone may be not everyone may be related to the voluntary carbon markets in the same amount. I just want to clarify what REDD+ carbon credits are. And this REDD+ is a UNFCCC program designed to encourage payments for avoided emissions. And REDD+ was devised as a program that would facilitate results-based payments for reduced emissions from deforestation and forest degradation. That's the acronym for REDD. And I mean, it also has a role in conservation, sustainable management, and enhancement of forest of carbon stocks in developing countries. And then just going a little bit into the details, so REDD+ has two different levels, let's say. One is the project level, which is could be managed by private entities, and it's just like this specific area within a country or within a state that has a protection of forest. Whereas the other level is jurisdictional level, which is the protection of forest at a national or a subnational level. Emergent focuses on the jurisdictional level because we see this as a way to incentivize long-lasting systems changes. For example, those that would have to be replicated really result into policy changes and regulation that supports the protection of forests and the reduction of deforestation. We think that this has also better opportunity to have permanence of protected forest and permanence in the reductions that derive from deforestation. And just I gave a bit of background of what Emergent does, but really just to contextualize and just before we hone into the legal aspects of what Emergent does, I'll just use an example of one of the initiatives that we manage. Emergent manages the LEAF Coalition, we're the administrative coordinator of the LEAF Coalition. The LEAF Coalition is the largest public-private initiative designed to tackle climate change by mobilizing resource-based payment to forest countries. So far, the LEAF Coalition represents $1 billion of commitments to buy REDD+ jurisdictional credits from countries that issue their credits under a program called the Architecture for REDD+ Transactions that has in turn also created a standard that is high integrity and that addresses some of the concerns that have happened in the past in the context of REDD+ carbon credits. And in our role as administrative coordinator of the LEAF Coalition is super interesting because Emergent is a nonprofit organization, right? Our mission is to basically tackle climate change. So we sit in the middle as the administrative coordination of the LEAF Coalition. And basically what this means is that Emergent enters into transactions, emission reduction purchase agreements with host jurisdictions. And then in turn, we enter into the same, like in ERPA is the acronym, with corporate buyers. These documents are back to back. Emergent is a nonprofit, we cannot really retain any liability or risk. So we are like working on the supply side and then working on the demand side. And really what this means is that we can have this group of like LEAF Coalition buyers that are corporates and sovereigns transact through Emergent, and then Emergent interacts directly with the host jurisdictions, which, as many of you know, is not an easy thing to do. And it's just better to, we are just as the entity that is transacting directly with host jurisdictions, making it, like I would say, like facilitating the transaction for corporates that have a need to buy REDD+ jurisdictional credits. And I would say practicing in this environment, I joined Emergent in October, but I can already say that practicing in the voluntary carbon markets is a very interesting area to be working at right now, especially because the voluntary carbon markets are like ramping up. Everything is very fluid. You're almost like building the plane as you fly it. There are conversations among NGOs, there are conversations among all the entities that are participating in the voluntary carbon markets. There are conversations at COP26, very relevant conversations happen and so on. So it really calls for being like really up to date and aware of what is going on in the market and what is the consensus that is being built among certain groups. It is also very challenging, right? It's very challenging to be practicing in a sector that is so evolving as we speak. And I do think that lawyers have a very relevant part to play here. Emergent has been able to do what it's done so far because of the support that we have from external counsel. We have the support from Latham & Watkins, which has been providing pro bono support for over 2 years in structuring the whole transaction and putting an army of lawyers on helping move this initiative forward. But we also have an independent advisor who has more than 20 years of experience working on carbon markets between the World Bank and also as an independent advisor. And we also have local law firms who are really like, it really is one of the tools that Emergent could not do without. And that is the area where I think that law firms that have a very robust experience, both internationally and locally, have a very important role to play. You have they have all this robust experience. You have all this experience with different actors in different sectors, and then you can bring it to an area that I think everyone recognizes that it's a priority, and that also gives lawyers at law firms a very good experience to know that they're using their abilities to something that might align with their own personal goals. So certainly a very interesting area to be practicing in, one that really calls for constant, I would say, awareness of what is going around, but also that really calls for a collaborative approach among law firms, among practitioners, and trying to move initiatives that are tackling climate change.
Very interesting. And I think I answered this question. You already answered this question, but just based on the primary forest coverage and the importance that the region has, obviously Latin America will play a pivotal role in this mission. So maybe I wanted to ask, what challenges do you think we still face as a region to be fully integrated into this mechanism and be able to better protect the forests?
Yeah, well, Latin America, yes, it plays a very important role. It has the Amazon biome. And I mean, there are studies that say that if we lose the peaking point of losing the Amazon of deforestation in the Amazon is 30%. Once you reach 30%, the biome irreversibly will turn into a savanna. So that is obviously something that no one can afford. We should protect the Amazon forest. So there is a very important role to be played by the countries that have some part of these biome. I think certainly there are a lot of actions that are taking place on the ground. I mean, there are many drivers of deforestation, and emergent, really the voluntary carbon markets, like the approach is to create an incentive for forest country, like the countries that have tropical forests, to implement programs and policies that stop deforestation and basically have a financial incentive to do that, right? Like there are other sectors that would give a financial incentive to do the other thing, like the other way around. This is trying to like turn the needle or like move the needle towards conservation. And I think it's the typical challenges that I think are like country level risks, which are like a rule of law, strong institutions, but also like really taking care of, like in the context of Latin America and specifically in the Amazon, is also engaging with all the stakeholders. I mean, countries have to engage with all stakeholders, including indigenous communities. So there is definitely like these the usual challenges, but also these movement towards actually getting things on. And in the context of what Emergent is doing, as I mentioned, we only transact credits that have been validated and verified by the art, and the art has a standard that it's the most conservative and high level integrity standard in the market, that requires countries to go through really like very strong policies and regulations have to be in place so that a country can issue credits there. So I think the more countries, the more the incentive can be created towards countries participating in this registry or really strengthening the relevant systems that have to be in place, I think that would bring towards a more like a positive, I would say, outcome in the region. But and that's what the LEAF Coalition is trying to do, like trying to show that there's, this interest, there's demand for the carbon credits that could be issued by first countries. And hopefully, that's just a start, and we're just one actor. Really, the solution requires a lot more money and a lot more mobilization. But certainly Latin America has a very strong role to play here, as like similar regions in other continents.
So picking up on that, you mentioned the standards, and maybe as the world moves toward this kind of marketplace and kind of a bond market for carbon, how can you ensure for maybe consumers or governments or just accountability purposes that the quality is there for these type of bonds and avoid the term greenwashing, or maybe credits or bonds that are not really contributing to the end mission?
Yeah, this is just like a personal opinion, not really speaking for Emergent. I think the way I see this is exactly as like it's the way you mentioned it. Is on the one side is about the integrity of the credits that are being issued, and then or at least there are two sides. There I'm sure there are others, and then it's this issue about the buyers or the payers for these credits. And I'll start with talking about the integrity of the credits that are issued. the way, I mean, as I've mentioned before, like we only transact through the art, and then this standard that the art has created has, I mean, it countries that issue credits through the art have to go through very comprehensive requirements that are meant to, are meant to ensure that there's integrity in the issues that are in the credits that are issued, and the requirements are, among other things, related to accounting and crediting, monitoring, reporting, independent verification, mitigation of leakage, which is what happens when you have a project in one area and then not in the other area, and then the deforestation leakages to another area. There's under the art, there's the concept, because the reason for doing jurisdictional approach is that there is no leakage, and also like there's this strong mechanism to avoid reversals, meaning like deforestation above the crediting level under which countries issued their credits. Then there's a very strong, there's a mechanism for avoidance of double counting, and then a mechanism for assurance of robust environmental and social safeguards. One of the things that, one of the reasons why art is like high integrity is because it integrates the Cancun safeguards into the requirements that countries have to meet in order to issue credits on their art. And then also the registry is public. Everyone can see who's buying the credit and who is a secondary buyer and so on. So that's what I think about, like in terms of the integrity of the issues of the credits that are issued. And then on the side of consumer, like the demand, let's say, I think certainly the ambition should be to reduce emissions throughout the supply chain of any company, throughout scope 3. And the way, for example, that the LEAF coalition has addressed this is that participants to the LEAF coalition have to meet criteria that is like, it's basically on publicly commit to science-based targets, which is like SBTi, or equivalent quantified and independently verified decarbonization targets. So it's also about not only the integrity of the issues, but also trying to reduce as much as, abate as much as possible emissions within your own operations. But there's a living discussion and debate around this, but I do think that there are initiatives that are trying to work towards a very consistent and serious approach.
Great. No, thank you. I think it's very interesting and definitely a lot more to discuss there. But maybe just turning to our last but not least moderator, Federico. I wanted to discuss with you the issue of cannabis legalization. Since 2013, Uruguay became the first country in the world to legalize cannabis, and since then we've seen initiatives follow that example. So maybe from your example, almost 10 years since that happened in Uruguay, what have been the challenges that the country has faced, that the companies have faced in locally, and how can that maybe illustrate what may be to come in other countries following those steps?
All right. Well, thank you, Diego, for coordinating this and the IBA for having us. It's a pleasure. Well, yeah. I mean, it's been almost 10 years since the country has legalized the production and the sale of cannabis products, and it has not been an easy journey. Just to give you a sense, what we had before is just like a general drugs regulation that said that you cannot buy, sell, produce, or transport drugs, and cannabis was one of that drugs. Basically what the government did was saying, okay, this law still applies except if you are under this new regulation in which you need to get a license to do all these commercial activities with cannabis. And since and at this moment that we have 4 different laws that refer to cannabis and 6 decrees which regulate cannabis in different ways, different sides of this complex situation, and that kind of shows you that the approach that the government had was not really was not very organized, and maybe clumsy in a way. And I mean, you cannot be hard on them because they were being pioneers in this, and doing the first first steps in the world in some way, in the whole world in some way. So they pay the price of being in that situation. And truly, we have been working with companies in this business, and from different sides. We have helped investors who came and just put money in the companies, and we have helped sponsors or promoters who have developed the projects, and they have faced and they still face different challenges, and it's really not an easy when all these guys come to the office, okay, we want to do this, we have this idea, we're gonna have this CBD, or want to do a medicinal product, or just export the flowers and other plants. It seems easier than what it is in practice, and all these projects have shown that usually the timing which they expected is not what actually turns to be, and the money they had to put in is not exactly what they expect to put in there. I mean, if you talk to the players and to the companies and entrepreneurs, what they will say is that there's a lot of bureaucracy around cannabis, and that's because, of course, our country was really, our government was really jealous and worried about not doing something wrong, not going to the market with cannabis products that would injure people, or exporting products to other countries and having problems in other countries. So that kind of forced the government to be extra careful in every step that they take, and that of course adds bureaucracy, adds time, and that is money, of course. And so at this point we have like 4 or 5 different agencies that are involved in the cannabis licensing and approvals and exporting, importing processes, and sometimes all these agencies are not very much aligned. You do have like a central cannabis agency, but you have to talk with the Ministry of Public Health if you wanna license, to issue cosmetic with cannabis, or medicine, or food, or something that somebody is going to put into its body. And for example, in the Ministry of Public Health, it was the people in there were not very aligned with the cannabis idea, the whole cannabis idea. They didn't buy it. So they were not actually helping it. And those things make, this process more complicated, from, in the very practical point. It's not a regulation issue. It's more like a practical point that we're, complicating, and making these projects more, longer than they should. Another very big challenge that the companies have here in Uruguay is the banking situation. Unfortunately, due to the US federal regulations, not the state ones, but the federal ones, those US banks, we have a federal license, have this standard, that this regulation that says, the Controlled Substance Act in the US, that says that cannabis is a forbidden product. So what they do is they say, okay, all the Uruguayan banks which need to work with a correspondent bank in the US, to bring and to send dollars to abroad, have accounts in those banks, and those banks force them to sign a declaration, say that they don't have any client which works for or is related to cannabis. And that is, it's kind of a very odd situation from our country point of view, because you have an activity which is perfectly legal. The government is actively encouraging people to invest and to go into this market, but you cannot open a bank account, and that has two, I think that there's two really downsides on that. First, that I have had meetings with fund managers, people coming abroad saying, okay, I want to invest $10 or $15 million, and when you go to the point saying, okay, but you cannot have a bank account in Uruguay, they say, well, so what is this? It sounds like a joke. I mean, I'm going to put $10 million in this project and I cannot hold an account. I mean, it doesn't sound serious. And the other thing is that it poses a lot of practical problems for the companies, because they can set up accounts abroad. They can, if they export, they send the money to an account in another jurisdiction, and that eventually goes to the shareholders. But when they have to bring the money down and pay taxes, pay salaries, and pay the rent, that's where the problem comes. And they have to go into these really complex engineering of accounts, or they lie to the bank, or they just open accounts on the name of the directors or shareholders, or they use accounts of other companies that they have. And it's really, and of course all this adds costs to the transactional costs. And so that's a really big problem. With the change in the Biden administration, there's a hope that the Controlled Substance Act is going to change. It hasn't, I mean, so far it hasn't moved too much. Of course, I understand that the US is worried about other geopolitical things at this moment, but of course, there was a really high hopes from the markets that the change will be, and probably when that change is going to be a turning point for our country and other countries that we know are in the same situation. And maybe it's just like one of the last challenge that we have seen. It's not kind of a legal one, but it's really a really difficult thing. Is producing really good quality products. We do have, like, we see companies here that end up producing products that cannot be exported to Europe or Switzerland, Portugal, which are the countries that are buying, because just the quality is not right for them. I believe there has been a lot of improvisation in this market, because when everything started, you didn't have like a lot of people with a track record saying, okay, I have done this in the past and I know how to do this and I want to do it better. You have people who were involved in the area. They have knowledge. You have like a chemical pharmaceutical that helps you in some part, but they were not they didn't have a really specialization in cannabis, and that had made companies who they sort out all the bureaucracy, they obtain the license, they end up having a product, but they cannot sell it, or the price that they get for that is not what they expect to be, because it's not GMP or other standards that Europe requests. So focusing, that's one of the advice that we give to our clients when they come, saying, okay, I'm going to invest in this, this company. I know this guy. We always go, okay, go do your due diligence, right? I mean, this is not legal, but make sure that you are, hooking up with the right people, guys who really know what you're doing and really know where they're going to. Those are, the main challenges that we have seen for this type of companies.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, as a banking lawyer myself, whenever I hear of these initiatives, my thought always goes to how are they going to set up the accounts and complete the KYC process. And I know that's even an issue in the United States, in like Colorado and all that, where kind of this parallel system develops. Maybe an opportunity there for the fintech sector. Maybe drawing from that experience and things that are out of control, like the federal banking laws in the US, but as more countries move towards this situation, maybe what recommendations would you give to the policymakers and in setting that up?
Well, I mean, first, I think you need really strong support from the government. We had three different governments, in this since the law was created. And for example, our first government that kind of, made the big change and did the liberalization and legalization of cannabis. Then it turned into another government, which was from the same party, same left party, but the president was like a doctor, oncologist, and he hates and was against smoking, marijuana, and everything that's related to marijuana. So you could imagine that in those 5 years, there was not a really big support from the president, and that's something that watered down to the different agencies that had to be involved. So government support is really important if you want this market to flourish and to work. You need to have a really good regulation. We kind of had the learning curve, and now other countries have other experiences to use as inspiration. You have Uruguay, but you have Canada. Canada has a really good and very thorough and thick regulation, which is very clear. So going straight into a really good regulation is something that will cut some corners for the government and for the market. Another recommendation for policymakers will be to try to focus concentrate the regulation powers in one or two agencies, not have this split in 5, 4, 6 agencies, because it's out of control. We do have some if you want to get a license for certain type of production of cannabis, you have to go through the same file goes through 4 different agencies, and that's when that happens, it's nobody's fault. Nobody's responsible for the year and a half or year that the file has. So if you go and try to some way give it power to 1 or 2 agencies, that's something that's going to help. Probably another recommendation that is more for investors, something that I already said, is be very careful with who you are teaming up and using as going with partners, because there were like a lot of people who seem to know about the business and end up making people put money into good money into bad business decisions. So that's another recommendation from our experience.
Right. Well, no, I think definitely a lot more to discuss here, and it's super interesting to see just how Uruguay has been dealing with that experience. I think maybe we can open up for questions. If anybody has any questions, they can write it down for any of the panelists, or if any of the panelists want to ask each other something, we can also do that, just to provide that for the audience, just in case. So if anybody has a question, I'll give you some time to write that down, and you can include who it is addressed to. Maybe just in case we get one, but Federico, have you seen, like, I know it may be complicated, but have you seen any international based transactions in the cannabis sector, like any international M&As, cross-border financing? Are there any entities?
I mean, mainly cross-border financing, foreign funds, Canadian funds, or US funds that have put money into companies. Sometimes that's structured not entirely locally because they go through financing holding companies in other jurisdictions. But of course, as a local lawyer, you do help in that process. International M&A, it's not something that we have seen yet, because these companies either don't have a good business case or they are kind of still maturing. You do have a lot of people coming in and out of these companies, and then it's strictly M&A, but it's not like the typical corporate M&A that we see in our law firms. Not yet. Hopefully, if this gets better, we'll start seeing that.
Definitely, if they start making enough money, I'm sure there'll be M&A work in the future. Great. I think, I mean, if there are not any questions, we can wrap up here. We're almost up on the hour. So I just wanted to thank everyone for joining, Fernando, Alejandra, Federico. All of these topics I think are super interesting. I think they could be the subject of one whole 1 hour panel just on themselves, but I think we got like a broad idea of some of the legal areas that are going to be very important in the future. So thank you for participating, and thanks everyone for joining, and until the next time that we meet.
Thank you very much, Diego, and very nice to meet you.
Thank you, Diego.
Thank you all.
Thank you guys, Federico,
Bye, thanks.
Alejandra, and thanks, Diego, for
Alejandra,
moderating.
Diego.
Thank you, the
Thanks.
IBA. Bye-bye.